I know that it irritates a lot of parents, but I loved it when my daughter went through that toddler phase of always asking why. It didn't last as long for her as it does for most kids, I think, probably because I would take it as an opportunity to just sit on the floor and take an hour explaining to her why. But you don't want to pass up a teachable moment, you know? But I sincerely think that more of us should really try to get some of that curiosity back. We stopped asking why, and we start accepting the status quo as if the way that things are is the way that things ought to be. And in fact, religious people will tend to insist that the way that things are the way that God wants them to be. In the past couple of years, we've begun talking a lot about patriarchy and toxic masculinity, about white male privilege and the assumptions we make about who gets to hold the reins of power in society. Why won't the Catholic Church ordain women as priests? Why won't the Assemblies of God, the Baptists, and most evangelical churches allow women to be ministers? I've been a pastor for 40 years. I've never used my boy parts in preaching. It doesn't make any sense that this gender prejudice continues. Yes, thank God. I'm not going to start. Yes. See if you can edit out the running commentary from it. Why are most corporate CEOs still men? And last year we had the largest number of women elected to the legislative branch of government in our government's history. Yes. It's improvement, but women still only make up about a quarter of the total senators and members of Congress. And last time I checked, they made up 51% of society. In 220-some, 30-some years, we've never elected a woman as president of the United States. I want to ask you to indulge me just a moment to do a little armchair anthropology in public. We all know that in any crisis, we place a much higher value on the lives of women and children than we do men. And that's not just true about loading the lifeboats on the Titanic. It's been true for centuries in warfare or times of scarcity or starvation. And it's not simple chivalry. These values, if you ask why, they almost always, these values arise in a society because it's what helps to perpetuate the society. In the ancient world, when tribes competed for control of resources, it was much more important to protect women than to protect men. If most of your tribe is wiped out in a war or a natural disaster or an illness, then it takes women and children to rebuild the tribe. A single man can sire several children in a month, but a woman can typically only bear a child about once a year. Therefore, men are expendable, and women are precious to a tribe's survival. This is just looking at our values anthropologically. But this value creeps unconsciously into our cultural assumptions. Anthropologists have even been looking at how expendable men are in video games. Sure, women don't get portrayed in very flattering ways in most video games. There's exaggerated sexuality, and men are typically portrayed as just expendable. But even in games for children, James Bond video games and stuff, shooting up dozens of men as if your 6-year-old had suddenly become John Wick is not much of an issue. It doesn't raise much of an emotional reaction from even passive observers. But you don't see video games in which dozens of women are thoughtlessly mowed down in a hailstorm of bullets. Unconsciously, even in fantasy, men are expendable and women are to be protected. Now that might sound like a good deal for women and children, but what they sacrifice in this life or death exchange is their freedom from domination. Patriarchy is the price that women pay for protection. The role of men as warriors translates into men as rulers, men as owners, men as decision makers, and like it or not, men as predators. To the degree that cinema is a reflection of society, we have to admit that for the first 100 years of movies, men or women were basically to either be protected, rescued, or seduced. In the early James Bond films, it was not so much that the dashing secret agent was irresistible, it was that he was basically a misogynist and sometimes a rapist. In 50 years of pushback from feminists and more equality-minded movie consumers, the movies have become a little less rapey, but not much less misogynistic. The popular genre of superhero movies have, in the past year, finally given us a black superhero, and a female superhero gets her own movie. But look at their costumes. If you were going into battle on a snowy battlefield in Germany, wouldn't you wear something a little warmer? Gender progress comes very, very slowly. Terry Crews, a professional football player turned actor, comedian, and author, has written a book about toxic masculinity, something that he says he has known from the inside, something that he participated in and had to grow out of. He talks about his own journey to correct those masculine stereotypes and, quite literally, how to be a better man. But what intrigued me was when he talked about some of the high-profile sexual predators who've been fired, criminally charged, or forced out of elected office. He's talked about the enthusiasm around the trial of Bill Cosby, the firing of Harvey Weinstein, Trent Franks, Matt Lauer, Charlie Rose, Louis C.K., Kevin Spacey, Mark Halpern, and now R. Kelly gets his own miniseries, a documentary series, to give all of the women that he's abused a chance to speak. But what I really appreciate about Terry Crews saying all of that is this media bluster about famous figures amounts to trying to cut down a tree by cutting the leaves. Some of these guys have been absolute monsters, and their cases make for great TV news drama, but Crews is saying that the real problem of toxic masculinity is in the trunk of the tree. It's a part of society. And as bad as the whole matter of employers sexually exploiting their employees, the real meat and potatoes of sexual harassment is peer-to-peer in nature. It isn't just politicians and movie producers and rock stars. It's guys working out at the Y who think that just because a woman is working out at the Y, that they can go over and make salacious comments about their body. It's the guy working beside you in the insurance office or next to you on the manufacturing floor or in the restaurant who believes that proximity equates to permission. Permission to touch, to suggest, or even to demand sexual attention. Patriarchalism, white male privilege, toxic masculinity is so prevalent in society that it's hard to see. It's always been there, and we've had difficulty noticing it. And once a virtual crusade against these evils begins by targeting high-profile figures, there's bound to be some collateral damage. I personally believe that the hunt for male predators went overboard when they equated the offenses of people like Garrison Keillor and Senator Al Franken to the likes of Harvey Weinstein and Matt Lauer. We've got to be able to make some distinctions in the degree to which these people have offended. Now, this is just for free, but I personally believe that Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is going to announce a candidacy for president this week, and it is time for a woman to be president. Is this on? I believe that it is time for a woman to be president, but Gillibrand, though she has been one of the kind of people that most of us would be inclined to agree with her values, the fact that she was eager to sacrifice her peer, supporter, and friend, Al Franken, on the Me Too altar will mean that a whole lot of us will view her very differently in the future. I don't know that I would trust her now. As you know, this time last year, we invited Dr. Nicole Fisk to this pulpit to publicly applaud the Me Too movement. And we've not changed our laudatory view of the process, but we don't want to try to cut down the tree of patriarchy by just cutting the leaves. We want to make substantive change, the kind of change in society that will make going to work different for a waitress, for a flight attendant, for assembly line workers and secretaries, not just actresses and recording artists. Hollywood is beginning to evolve. If you've not seen either of J.K. Rowling's screenplays, in which she offers us the male role model that I've been dying to see in the magical character of Newt Scamander, played by Eddie Redmayne. Newt is intelligent and sensitive. He heroically rescues endangered, albeit magical beasts, but he is reserved, sometimes passive, but strong in his respect for women, for life, and for troubled people. He offers us a view of a man who can be admired and praised, who is not toxic, who is not power hungry, and who is not violent. In the same way as having openly gay characters in sitcoms helped Americans to change their views about the gay community, these kinds of cinema evolutions in how we think about leading men can only help us to reimagine what it means to be a good man. That, when coupled with offering us some images of strong, self-reliant women who don't have to be rescued, who don't have to be seduced or tarted up for the camera, then maybe our daughters will have a chance of seeing themselves in a different universe than the one that we grew up in. But by way of conclusion, I want to confess that there was a bit of free association involved in my selection of the wisdom lesson today. When I first read this short text from Jeff Brown's Spiritual Graffiti, it made me think more about the back and forth of society in the past decade. We took a huge step in 2008 when we elected a black president. 8 years later, a woman won the nomination of the Democratic Party and, in fact, won the popular vote in the presidential election. But then, like society's id demanding one more day in the sun, we have the absolute worst of human nature asserting itself in Donald Trump's presidency. Amen. Jeff Brown was talking about how individuals will make a situation in their lives 10 times worse before they develop what in physics or chemistry, people talk about the activation energy needed to get a reaction started. But psychologically, there is an activation energy that becomes necessary to get us out of a bad situation. I see this in domestic violence cases all the time. Women will go back and back and back into a dangerously toxic relationship until it comes right up to the cusp of murder before they make the necessary break to end all contact with their abuser. I think that America right now is in a toxic relationship with Donald Trump. On day one, yeah, go ahead and say amen. When did you all become timid? On day one of his candidacy, it was obvious to any objective observer that he was an uneducated, unqualified racist and misogynist. Every day has gotten worse, down to this weekend's breaking news that the FBI has been investigating him out of a substantive fear that he was actually working for the Russian government while holding the highest elected office in the world. The one thing that he has shown us is just how far off the rails a Republican president can go without being impeached. Bill Clinton had an in-office affair and was impeached. Bill Clinton makes Donald Trump look like, well, Trump makes Clinton look like a choir boy, I guess is what I meant to say. I'm forced to wonder if this is an unconscious way that our entire culture is going deeper into a toxic relationship in order for us to find the collective activation energy to finally push forward to accomplish the kind of progress that we've been waiting for. Now, I can imagine a 2019 in which Trump is either forced to resign or be impeached. I can imagine a movement in our country that will bring progressive goals into the mainstream, no matter how much the officials of the Democratic Party resist it, but making things like universal health care, sane gun laws, better immigration laws, access to higher education, and a rebuilding of our nation's infrastructure, those ideas are centrist. They are not radical socialist ideas. The majority of Americans are ready. Isn't it too bad that neither of our political parties are ready to endorse these ideas? But our time has come. Now, the last couple of years have been tough for those of us who've spent decades working on these progressive ideas. Trump blew all of the dog whistles of racism, misogyny, xenophobia, classism, Islamophobia in order to get elected. But please note that the Women's March the day after his inauguration was 3 times the size of the supporters who showed up for the inauguration. Sure, it was a serious loss brought to us by an unholy alliance between angry white men voters and Russia's propaganda arm. But even that failure is instructive. The world is changing. In many ways, it is changing through attrition, as the angry white male vote is going both literally and figuratively to the graveyard. And the next generation of voters is not only browner and blacker, but it is less prejudiced. It is better informed, and it is more progressive. The current Congress has more women and more people of color than any preceding Congress. And it is up to us to make sure that we don't reverse that trend, that we keep it going. We may be in the midst of a very cold winter, of a fallback into the hands of greedy capitalists, racists, and white nationalists. But this winter will not last forever. Have I ever told you that as much as I love spring and summer, my favorite season is the fall of patriarchy?
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.